Hey YouTube, welcome back to UniXTCG, and we are back with another Gundam card game video. Now you may notice that my backdrop looks a little bare, and that's because in the next week I am moving, so I am packing my living space and preparing for that transition. So I will try to stay on top of content as best I can in the interim, upload extra where I can and schedule it, and then really just try to hit the ground running once I do move. But this video today is going to be about the age-old, and by age-old I mean like maybe 3-month-old question, of what is worse for the game, the rabid influx of blocker based decks, or just the super turn sideways aggro based decks. So we are going to dive into that and talk about it. Now, right before we hop into that, I do want to let you guys know that I let the members of this channel choose which deck I was going to craft and focus on for the week, and as you guys can see on the screen, it will be Blue X Titans. I'm gonna make the best Titans deck I can right now. I'm gonna take it to a bunch of locals and give you guys gameplay and members only gameplay based off of that, and a deck profile of course. So yeah, hope you guys are excited for that. But that being said, let us hop into the discussion. So as we stated before, we are actually going to talk about a huge bit of discourse in the community right now, and it is the blocker meta versus the aggro meta. On one side, you have a deck or a bunch of decks that literally will just clog up the board with blockers and give you the most passive gameplay of all time until they reach about 8 resources, and then they start actually popping off and actually doing things that matter. And that's crazy, right? Slows down the game, makes the game very boring, very monotonous, and it really does kind of make a certain framework where all these decks have to play white to have access to these blockers, meaning that a great half of the deck is the same blockers paired with maybe a couple copies of Unforeseen, 4 copies of Overflowing Affection, and it really just started to get stale. But on the other side, you have the aggro based decks, generally with even less variety, because you're really just playing green blue for the most part. We'll get into more options later, where you are just turning card after card after card sideways. A good half of your cards are just well statted vanillas, and the only real interaction you have in the game is to play a pilot that either rests a blocker or play a pilot that gets around blockers entirely if it links. So it's kind of very, very weird. Now, I do want to get this out of the way right here, front and foremost. Which side is right? Are the side complaining about all the blockers in our meta, or the side complaining about aggro? Well, shocking newsflash, you're both cringe. I'm just gonna say it. Like, the thing is, there are some problems that we're going to get into, but at the same time, both of these archetypes are necessary to keep the game as balanced as it can be at times, with really the only real loser in the format being mid-range, which is a travesty on its own, but we're going to explain that later in the video. First, we're going to have to take a little bit of a history lesson. I say history like this game has been on the market for more than a year, even 6 months. But we're going to take a history lesson to talk about why the format has gotten this way. So to understand the progression of the format, back when we had just the beta cards, right? You already saw that white was going to be the defensive color of choice, housing powerful blockers such as the Ailstrike Gundam, where when paired with a level 4 or higher pilot, you could bounce back one unit with 4 or less HP. And because it's not linked but paired, you could pair this with Kira or Amuro or Soletta, all to get the bounce back and really just like stunt your opponent's board while providing a blocker, potentially with momentum if you linked it with Kira. So very good things. On top of that though, you also have the ability to have Launcher Strike in there, just being a powerful blocker with a 4 HP stat, as well as Perfect Strike Gundam, which not only had a powerful 4 HP stat, which is the only stat that really matters to these blockers most of the time, but you also were able to choose an enemy unit with 1 HP and return to the owner's hand, which at the time got rid of really cool units to bounce, such as tokens made by Zaku cards. So I think this is actually a really cool thing to get at. But then you move over to the set 1 meta, where we got just new additions that are going to include things like Zawart from the starter deck, something that was good because it could actually KO powerful 4/3 stat bodies like the Rizal. You had cards like Gundam Ilfrith, which is literally one of the staple blockers of all time so far with this game, with the 2/4 body, as well as the ability to come out on turn 2 if you have the resource, and just really putting a stop to a whole lot of aggro shenanigans, being able to not only block but chump a 2/2 out of the water. Moving past that, you had top end like Freedom, and this one was kind of weird. People experimented with it. Some decks still like to tech a couple copies in, but a lot of people end up finding that Freedom was too clunky, especially seeing as that the more we started to solidify into our current meta, the more we realized that the purpose was not to just make a bunch of links on the board with these white units. What Freedom does need to do. In Freedom, you need to be pairing pilots with your white units to give things -2. No. Too much neuron activation. We're not trying to do all that. We're just trying to play blocker after blocker after blocker after blocker until whatever other top end in another color we are trying to use is able to be deployed. So this card kind of did fall off in a lot of cases. But also, we did have Striker Pack, and Striker Pack is toxic for a couple of different reasons. It is very cool that you can make a 4/2 or a 2/4. Mostly it's going to be the 2/4, but sometimes the 4/2 does come out. But the other thing is, on top of bases potentially stopping game pushes, it's really crazy that by running 3 to 4 Striker Pack, sometimes you can just have a literal blocker come out of your life or your shields and stop the game from progressing. So you had a whole lot of defensive measures, and the main deck that took advantage of this defensive measures were going to be the Wing Gundam decks, where you're going to pretty much need to survive until you play your ace in the hole Wing Gundam 0 that we have on screen, and that was already going to be a pretty cool strat. Now this pretty much devolved though, because at first we were running, Shinlongs and Wu Feis. Most decks were running Death Scythes and Duos to get that first strike point and kill button, as well as ramping you. Some decks were playing, Wing Gundam Bird mode. Decks were out here, sometimes even experimenting with copies of First Contact. But eventually people realized, right, that this is a really cool strategy, but we can go deeper. But at the time, with this sort of strategy, you were pretty much just trying to play this weird defensive tempo until you were able to get to Wing 0 and close out the game. And I like that. At the time, your biggest other op in the format was found to be this red-blue ping deck, featuring Kshatriya and Marita as its main link, being able to provide little ping damage across the board, combining that with, blue ping cards like Gun Tank, as well as the Angsha, cards like Battle of Aces. And then when you got to your top end, you were able to play out Unicorn Gundam Banshee Destroy Mode, which is a crazy card, and still to this day, one of the only cards that can swing a game from you being behind on tempo to you actually being ahead on tempo. So very, very, very powerful deck. And you were bringing it even closer to the ground by running GM as well as Zaku Mariner in order to bring that aggro to the front. So this was pretty much the meta. You had a bunch of decks flying around, including some white blue variants, whether they were blocker variants or tempo variants featuring Unicorn, but mainly you had the red blue ping flying around and the green white wing. And then something happened. We had essentially this point where aggro was truly entered into the format. The green-blue 1 Year War aggro deck was literally you just jamming cards to the board, and your only 2 pilots had no real, it wasn't about them gaining you advantage. It wasn't about you doing something crazy over the top. Your only 2 pilots were meant to get damage in or get damage in, with Char linking to something and giving it high maneuver, bypassing the blockers on the board, as well as Amuro just telling the blockers to sit down. And you would just have this thing where you just jam out bodies, turn them sideways, jam out bodies, turn them sideways, play a high maneuver card, break a base, swing with my entire board. So what if a couple of them get blocked? We're still going around. Amuro, sit that blocker down. And eventually you smash through somebody's just entire shield pull harder than you guys should actually be smashing the like button right now. I'm just I don't make the rules. I'm just trying to put you on game. But no, the point is though, realistically, you had this deck where a lot of people were kind of upset. And it's not because they were upset that aggro was in the game. They were upset for kind of a right reason. This deck thrives. This game thrives in mid-range interactions. You pair your pilots with your units. You try to get the coolest interactions ever. And then here comes this deck that doesn't want you to get past turn 5 or 6. And it makes you feel kind of invalidated for playing some of your favorite combinations and not being able to get off the ground because an aggro deck exists in an extremely body tempo oriented game. Aggro has its place in every single card game, as does mid-range, as does control, as does tempo. But in set 1, to have such an efficient aggro deck where the only downside was the RNG of you seeing enough of your 8 pilots was a little jarring. But at the end of the day, a lot of people either loved it for its simplicity and its win ratio, or they hated it because it really was the one neuron activation deck where you were just playing out cards, turning them sideways, occasionally making something unblockable, occasionally resting a blocker. But as we continued, something even more diabolical happened. And that was the real, like, kind of just broad in thought process that you didn't actually need to ramp with the green-white decks. You didn't need to. Surviving was always going to be more important than ramping. And so even though before they would have their cool Shenlong Wufei plays, they would have their cool Death Scythe duo plays, they would have little techs, you know, they might run a little Kira package with Sword Strike. Eventually, what these green-white wing players realized was that you fought a lack of neuron activation with a deeper lack of neuron activation. And they gutted everything that made their deck potentially spicy unique and just flooded it with more blockers and more unforeseen incidents. Complete turtle mode in order to ensure that eventually they would tap, or they would like get up to 8 resources, rest them, and then drop a wing 0 on the board and try to take over from there. And this kind of led to a very polarizing meta, because by the end of set 1, sorry, my controller is vibrating. Wow. By the end of set 1, what we got to is a format where you have a deck that is trying to end the game by turn 6 or so, and incredibly efficient at doing so unless it bricks. And then you had a deck that literally did absolutely nothing but gum up the board until turn 8, in which case it starts turning the field, or turning the tide of the game with a card that hurts most of the field, if not wipes out certain bodies, while having high maneuver so it can't be stopped when it swings. And the real losers, like I said before, were the mid-range decks that sometimes could play against both, but sometimes could be just too slow to survive against aggro, and other times could be too slow and allow mid-range, or sorry, these control wing decks to get up to maximum speed and then barrel them like towards the end of the game. And we needed a shakeup. We did need a shakeup. And so we were looking forward to set 2. We were looking forward to set 2 to hopefully change up the game. But did set 2 change up the game? We'll answer that question in a second. But first, I just want to let you guys know that if you are liking this video and you're still watching, how about you like the video? Smash that like button. It'll help the video thrive. And if you want to join the UniX fam today and never miss a beat on the Gundam card game content I produce, great time to join as well. Now, the last part I wanted to say is that we also do have a membership, and there's going to be more and more perks as it goes into, you know, just more and more depth. Now, I already let the members choose the deck I was going to run this week with the deck profile I'm going to release later, the gameplay I'm going to release later on public and the member side, but there's also cool giveaways like this Clan Unity giveaway where I'm going to choose 3 lucky winners who are just going to win this. All you have to do is join the membership, go to the post where I post about it, and then let me know your favorite GDO2 alt art, and you'll be entered in a chance to win one of 3 ST06 Clan Unity structure decks. It's only 99 cents a month for you, but it really does add up to me, and it means a lot, all of that support. Past that, if you want to see me play games like Pokemon Legends ZA, Digimon Story Time Stranger, Dragon Ball games of all types, talk about anime, manga, go over in the description, check out Universe X Media, that's my second channel, and I really do nerd out about all sorts of other things over there. Now, that being said, let's get back to the video. Thank you guys for the support. You mean the world to me. And yeah, hop back into it. Short answer. GDO2 made some changes. Whether they were the changes we wanted, I'm not quite sure. It's more like sprinkles were added to already vanilla ice cream not more like we got like Neapolitan or we got strawberry, we got mint chocolate chip. And I'll explain that why. Because the first thing that happens is we got another low to the ground white blocker staple, which is going to come in the form of Rick Diaz. And man, we didn't necessarily need another card like this, but hey, we got it, so it's here. And Rick Diaz is great. It's a level 3 2 cost that's going to fit in the same like kind of curve spot as Ilfrith, but it also is while it sits on the same part of the curve as Ilfrith, unlike Ilfrith, it can actually trade with a Rizal or a Hyakurin now that that's out from the purple starter deck. And so yeah, you've got another low to the ground blocker to help gum up the board, and you've given these white X decks another body to put on the board and prevent them from being attacked until later. Now, this did kind of change the game because as of set 2, we are now at a critical mass for white blockers that you can play in the first 5 turns of the game, maybe turn 6, maybe turn 7 as well. And what this means now is that the current meta for control decks is basically just stall decks with big payoffs at the end, are going to be playing white with the same 20-ish defensive core, and then of course you're going to have potentially your Kira pilots because they'll pair with your Ale strikes, they'll pair with like your perfect strikes if you run them, things like that, your sword strikes if you want to have a little more aggro tech, and then you are going to be playing your favorite, you know, top end of choice, whether that be Wing Gundam Zero in green, whether that be the new Gundam Epion in blue, whether that be the new Cubile in red, whether that even be Gundam X in purple. You're running the same white core, and then you're playing whatever top end around that with the techs that come with that color, unless you're Wing Gundam Zero, which there's no tech there. It's just like, I mean, I guess the Gundam Heavy Arms can potentially be great, bringing maybe back some Death Scythe combos, but nowadays most people are just like, why ramp if that turn of ramp causes me to take extra damage and need to? I'm not just playing a blocker. So that's just kind of that. And on the aggro side is kind of like dinosaur like. Green blue got maybe one card, and that being white Gundam, because it's gonna be another Char Link, comes out on curve, and on top of that, that has another high maneuver. It's gonna be a pretty big body too. 4/4 in that aggro deck is not anything to snuff or to like just like completely scoff at. So I think that that's actually pretty decent, but those two titans are there. It's just that the white X late game payoff deck just kind of gained different flavors. It wasn't like revolutionizing, it changed how it played. Now, coming into the mix, you also do have blue purple decks that do kind of constitute as aggro decks. I'm going to say that while I do find blue purple very, very cool, blue purple I truly believe is more of a tempo deck. You have pressure, you have things like Gundam Barbados First Form that's going to allow you as many draws as it can until it gets smoked off the board, which admittedly happens pretty quick, don't at me. And then on top of that, you have cards like Gundam Barbados Fourth Form, which is going to offer the new keyword suppression to chunk out multiple shields at a time. But you also are going to have Mikazuki, who's going to ping something on your side of the board, generally to enable effects, and then ping things on your opponent's board, and then combining that with cards like Gun Tank, cards like Angsha, you're going to get certain pings. However, I will say that once people start playing guys with 3 or more HP, your ping starts feeling worse and worse, meaning that sometimes it pairs up very badly against your wing decks, against your heavy blocker decks, especially if it's the new red-white deck that's coming out that really does have more ways to control the board while adding these blockers to come up the board so they can take control in the late game. Now, Mikazuki does have some very good synergy with our boy Amuro, because you're generally going to be able to ping things lower and then use Amuro to rest them. So even 6 HP, 7 HP just units are not safe from being rested by Amuro. And that's a really, really cool place to be in. But I don't think that blue purple is outstripping blue purple. I don't think blue purple is outstripping green blue. Between green and blue, green is definitely the more aggressive color, and when you're playing blue purple, as much as most people don't want to admit it, blue is kind of carrying. Blue is the vehicle. Purple does have a lot of unique cards and some really cool plays, but purple is the supplementary color in that deck combination. You are a blue purple deck, not a purple blue deck, if that makes sense. So I do think that while we have another aggressive archetype, green blue is still the archetype of aggro. It really is. It is the aggro color combination. Now, the last part about this is that this still has mid-range in the same spot. Nowadays, because of green blue being the de facto aggro color, but blue purple being the people's champion, because you know how fans love IBO. They love Iron Blood Orphans. Barbados can apparently solo any Gundam in the face of the earth, even though as much as I love Barbados, as much as I love Iron Blood Orphans, they made it really clear that Gundams were ancient, barely updated technology for 300 years. And a lot of Gundams in the main UC series, as well as alternative series for sure, could wax Barbatos. He's a melee bruiser with very, look, I'm not gonna get into all that. That's another video. But the point is, with green blue aggro running around and blue purple aggro running around, and you still have mid-range potentially getting beat down before they can get online. But with more variations of gum up the field with blocker decks and then play these big crazy bosses later on, mid-range may not be fast enough to close them out of their strategy before they start playing the biggest of bodies. So mid-range is still suffering, and I think that is the part that's a travesty here. This game, like I said, thrives in mid-range. If you've ever played a mid-range deck versus a mid-range deck, I bet you've had the most fun that you've ever played in this game. Literally, just play clan versus, I don't know, play clan versus traditional red-white that's trying to do more justice things than just sit and gun up the board and get to Cubile. It's gonna be fun. Play out a there's still so many mid-range decks. You have Gundam X builds, which are still a little experimental. I've been playing around with a Xeon build that I think is really fun, but it's not quite rush you down from the gates Xeon. It still has a little bit of that flavor in it, but it's a little bit heavier because Elmeth is a thicker card. But you play mid-range versus mid-range, the game feels fire. Heck, you play aggro versus aggro, the game can feel fire. You play late game control versus late game control, and that's not fire. It's actually quite boring, especially if it's wing versus wing. Some of the other ones don't feel as boring, but I literally feel like they don't feel as boring just because they're featuring new cards. They will feel just as boring in time. But realistically, aggro versus aggro, mid-range versus mid-range, even mid-range versus control can feel very back and forth. But what's really rough is when you're playing complete mismatch of archetypes, because being beat down to 2 shields before you can even start getting things online is just a death sentence with a deck that can just play out some high maneuver stuff and take your last couple shields. Having a deck that needs a couple more turns to get online, but not being a deck like Wing Zero or Epion or Cubile based, you're going to have a hard time stabilizing when they're getting to their stride, and pretty much just playing out the things with a full 4 or 5 shields because they've been playing nothing but blockers all game. Mid-range is the loser, I believe, of this game currently, while also being the most fun to play if you get a chance to actually play out your strategy. So when it comes to this, I don't think that either side is right when it comes to what's better or what's worse. I think that both of these archetypes have their pluses and minuses. I think that or for people that are saying Amuro Ray needs to be banned, that doesn't make sense. I do kind of think that Amuro should be win linked, but for this very moment in time, if Amuro got changed any, blocker decks would reign supreme. If Char got changed any, blocker decks would reign supreme. But at the same time, if we got rid of blockers, if we banned half the blockers right now or did something weird with it, aggro would reign supreme. There'd be no reason not to play aggro. So they're both messing up the format in my opinion, but they're also keeping each other in check, and mid-range can still win. You just have to get a little lucky. You have to draw pretty decent, and that's going to be a more of a consistency check more than anything, and that will come with time. We already saw cards like the Schoolgirl and the Smuggler search top 3. As we get more and more cards in the card pool, I am sure mid-range will be a better, faster, more consistent deck, and as soon as we get more staple cards to the card pool that can deal with some early bodies, we probably will see a shift where mid-range starts becoming the best deck, because it can be low enough to the ground to beat aggro, but it can be fast enough to beat those late game control decks. We just got to see. But for now, I just wanted to make a video to say that I think it's silly that we're arguing over which one is more toxic to the game, because without either one, the other one would make this game insufferable. Now, a funny thing, kind of happens when you add in, you know, maybe best of 3 and sideboards to the game. But that's gonna be another video. I'll talk about that later. So thank you guys for being here. I appreciate all the support. I'm getting through the comments. I swear I'm answering them as fast as I can. It's rough and I'm moving. So yeah, we ball. But yeah, again, thank you guys. You guys are the absolute best. Make sure you like the video if you want to thrive. Make sure you subscribe if you want to catch all of my Gundam content, and check out the membership if you want to see videos when I upload them, not when they're scheduled. If you want to get members only content, if you want to be able to join in giveaways, and if you want to just do silly things like, you know, pick the deck I'm going to be doing a deck profile on, brewing, and going over into locals with for the week. Thank you guys so much, and I will see you in the next video. Later.